we need to stop selling the tech. How many people use the internet and know how the internet works? Not many. So we need to stop explaining how it works and more the case of focus on the front end. So we know the difference between someone who's in Web2 and someone who's in Web3. But if you speak to someone in Web2 and say you're in Web2, they have no idea what you're talking about. Like, are you referencing Spider-Man? Are you on drugs? Might be some of the like, what do you mean I'm Web2 and you're Web3? It's like, again, context is very important. And that's why the front end makes all the difference.
Hi everyone, it's Jordan from the NEWFORUM team, and on today's episode, NEWFORUM is honored to have Mohamed Ezeldin, head of tokenomics at Animoca Brands, to discuss the best practices when it comes to tokenomics, meme coins, play to earn, and his overall thoughts on the current Web3 space, among other things. Mohamed, welcome to the episode, and let's start if you're ready.
Hey everyone, how are you guys doing? Pleasure to be on here. Thank you for your patience. I know we've had this rescheduled many times, but we've made it at last.
No, we're very happy to have you, Mohamed. So I guess the first question is, how did you get into Web3? And really, how does one become a head of tokenomics?
Very interesting. So I got in, I guess, prior to Web3 being Web3, more when it was crypto. So I was introduced to the Bitcoin white paper in 2017. I studied maths at uni, so I'd been exposed to that problem as the Byzantine generals problem. So it's like, this is amazing. This solves it. And then ICOs, forget about Bitcoin. Let's look at ICOs and let's start to make some money. This seems to be an easy way of being able to buy my house outright. I don't need to go through a mortgage. Went through the up and the down, and that's sort of when my journey into tokenomics began. I wanted to understand why I'd lost all of this money. Aside from the fact I didn't have an exit strategy, but for a lot of the investments, they were sold from a DD perspective that was done, a due diligence. It was the team was doxed, and they were genuine people. So why did this token not accrue any value? And sort of within my research, I realized there was no token, or it was a lack of tokenomics as opposed to the tokenomics being flawed. It wasn't a developed enough science. So I went down the tokenomics rabbit hole in 2018. I guess to give some context, prior to getting into crypto, I studied maths at university. I have 2 degrees in mathematics. I was also a high school maths teacher for 10 years prior to moving into crypto / Web3 full time in my current role. So they played a big part in the skills that I have to do what I do on a day-to-day basis. So how do you become a head of tokenomics? I believe your network is your net worth. But that wasn't how I got in. I was lucky that a recruiter for Animoca reached out based on me having done some advisory tokenomics work in 2018, 2019. And then early 2021, someone reached out and is like, okay, I've heard of Animoca, let me do a bit of research. Discovered that Yat was the chairman for Animoca Brands. And it was like, I love this guy's vision. It's a very similar vision to my own, but he can articulate it 100 times better than I can. And yeah, I think I got lucky, to be completely honest, if you believe in luck.
Well, we believe in creating your own luck. So that's pretty much what you did, right? In terms of tokenomics, could you give a brief description for the audience of really what it is that you study or that you research? And also, second part of the question, how do you think tokenomics have changed, not going in depth, but from you entering the space till today? And we'll go more in depth in later questions, but just the kind of evolution.
I guess on the first part, tokenomics is definitely a buzzword within the space. It has different meanings to different people. So the meaning that we take internally, especially within my department, is we see tokenomics in most instances as a value add, or you have a pre-existing ecosystem or an ecosystem that's being designed, if it's a platform or a product, and we see how tokenizing aspects of that or all of that and what that looks like. So that's including fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens plays a role. What part of your ecosystem is on-chain, off-chain? So for us, it's a whole suite of things as opposed to just what's the number of tokens this project is going to have, and is it inflationary, is it deflationary? Which then leads on to the second one, how have tokenomics changed? I think they've evolved quite a bit. So when we look at Bitcoin, for example, there was no sale on Bitcoin. It's you started mining Bitcoin, and then we had network effect. With Ethereum, and again, we know that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, so there's that max supply. With Ethereum, it was the opposite. There is no max supply. There's in theory an infinite supply of Ethereum. And at the time, they'd sold 80% to fundraise to actually build the chain during probably one of the very first, if not the first ICO. And then fast forward to today, we're seeing a lot less in projects selling tokens to raise. And if they are selling tokens, they're not selling ridiculous percentages. It's a lot more conceivable, some of in the range of 10 to 20%. So Tokenomics, I think when we're designing an ecosystem, it's not just the role of the fungible token, but also the roles that NFTs have to play within that as well. And what comes first? Are we launching NFT first? And if it is an NFT first, we're seeing loads of different types of NFTs. Again, the biggest thing we're seeing is PFPs for NFTs. We're also seeing it as in-game assets. We're also seeing it as a way to store reputation on chain as well.
How did the bull run really affect your research process and also at Animoca? Because obviously we saw the emergence of meme coins at a completely different scale than before. We saw really the emergence of reflective tokens. Not that it didn't exist before, but they became really popular. Retail was, kind of obsessed or curious about the fact that you could own billions of tokens for like a couple dollars. So, and obviously there's this utility aspect that wasn't necessarily there, but it appealed to the public and created awareness around the space. So what are your general thoughts on when you look back to the bull run, you look at PFPs, meme coins, and you don't really see the utility, but something happened. So how did that affect you?
I like to think of tokenomics, I like to compare it to physics, where you have theoretical physics and then applied physics. And this is the same with theoretical tokenomics and then applied tokenomics of what actually works. And in theory, based on utility, meme coins shouldn't work in that instance because they give no utility. But yet we saw at the height of the bull market, it was Doge and Shiba Inu were in the top 10. I think Doge is still in the top 10. Shiba Inu is down to 15 right now, and Floki is like 160 something. So we've had a fall from grace, barring Doge and Shiba. I think part of that is network effects, and what we don't take into account is how people associate with, if it's either a meme coin or if it's an NFT. And probably meme coins are the closest in terms of perception to NFTs, especially when we look at the amount of marketing that was done around a lot of again, taking Doge aside, a lot of the other meme or the newer meme coins in the past couple of years, there was a lot of marketing. And to your point, it was a lot of retail coming in to buy this on the premise it was going to change your life. There was a lot of people within India, for example, that were shilling Shiba Inu as this is going to change your life, and people were buying in because they could see it everywhere. So the sense of FOMO was real. And for those who don't know what FOMO is, it's fear of missing out. And it changed a lot of people's lives. But then I also think because it was a lot of retail that were buying, the reason why we haven't seen the likes of Shiba Inu and Floki drop in terms of market cap, so how much money is still within the ecosystem, is that a lot of people didn't sell because the bags they brought that were worth hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars or more are worth a hell of a lot less now. So it doesn't make sense to sell. So there's a lot of bag holders as well. And I guess I'll pause there for any follow-up questions.
No, I think that's a great answer. And I think tying it back to your research process, what do you do on a daily basis? Like going back to do you look at tokenomics as a way to provide value to an already existing ecosystem? Or do you look at tokenomics as building tokenomics to build an ecosystem? Do you need the ecosystem or do you build the ecosystem?
It's both. It depends on the platform. It depends on the project. So if you're dealing with a Web2 brand, for example, that wants to tokenize part of its ecosystem, I mean, Reddit is a perfect use case or a perfect example of that. You had the karma points and then there was the free mint, and they didn't call it an NFT. They called it a digital asset instead. And we can see the metrics for Reddit since launch. The floor prices have increased. There's been more unique active users, or unique active holders, shall I say, percentage-wise. And there's also been an increase in the amount of NFTs that are being minted. So that's an amazing proof of concept. So I guess to go back to the research argument or the research side of things, it's very difficult because there is no blueprint on how to do things. So a lot of the time, what we try to do is we try to delve into the crux of what the project needs and construct that from first principles. And then based on the outcome of that, that's then the research that needs to be done in terms of what other people have done. I don't know, breeding, for example, or how have they launched and when there's no community, how have they seeded the community using an NFT first, and when did it make sense to drop the fungible token to bind the ecosystem together, for example. So it really does vary from product to product or project to project.
Right. And you've written on Twitter, the biggest problem right now within the blockchain space is getting mass adoption. We've seen the rise of DeFi, NFTs, as gateways to bring culture into crypto. So could you expand on this and your overall thoughts on how do we bring culture into Web3, more culture and less speculation overall?
I think we need to still two things. Number one, we need to stop selling the tech. How many people use the internet and know how the internet works? Not many. So we need to stop explaining how it works and more the case of focus on the front end as opposed to the back end. So I think that's something that's definitely needed, and NFTs have allowed us to do that. So we've seen more adoption happen in the last couple of years because I can associate with an NFT more than I can associate with a fungible token.
In terms of, making the front end more approachable, less technical, what are your thoughts about the words DAOs or dark DAOs, NFTs, even white paper? Well, I mean, it's academic, but I mean, in general, have you seen new words appear, starting to emerge, or have you started thinking about how you would want to reframe the word DAO, the word NFTs to Web2, to brands, to people outside of Web2?
Great question. I think it's less the case of having to develop new words and more the case of leveraging existing vocabulary that people can understand. So we know the difference between someone who's in Web2 and someone who's in Web3. But if you speak to someone in Web2 and say you're in Web2, they have no idea what you're talking about. Like, are you referencing Spider-Man? Are you on drugs? Might be some of the
some are in all of these
responses. Yeah. Like, what do you mean I'm Web2 and you're Web3? It's like, again, context is very important, and that's why the front end makes all the difference. We've seen NFTs, for example, of musicians. I don't need to sign with a record label. I can release X amount of copies of my song as an NFT and sell them direct to consumer. And I own all of my rights and I own all of the distribution rights around it. So we're starting to see new business models emerge. I think a big challenge we face, which is why people haven't really taken to the back end, is the idea of digital ownership. We fully understand physical ownership. I own my house, I own my car, I own my watch, I own the clothes that I wear. But we don't understand the value of our digital data, be it in-game assets, be it the data that's collected on how our usage on platforms and that data being sold to whoever it's sold to, depending on what rabbit hole you go down.
Do you think we need to understand it? Or do you think that the projects building this infrastructure need to make it so simple that you don't really need to understand it, but the tech is just available to you?
So education is important, but in today's day and age where we absorb everything in a similar way to how fast food works, so everything else happens quickly, especially with the rise of TikTok, Instagram, these kinds of platforms. We're not able, or maybe we don't care about the why as much. We just care about getting that dopamine hit to begin with initially. So as much as I hate to say this, part of it has to be the product first, get people engaged, make sure the UI, UX is sexy as hell. And once people are within these ecosystems, let's assume it's a game ecosystem or a fashion ecosystem, and I unlock an in-game asset or a piece of fashion that's represented as an NFT, or we'll call it a digital collectible, and that has value, it has serious value, then all of a sudden I'm interested. Why is this, I don't know, this sword in this game or this jacket from this fashion metaverse, why is it worth 10K? Why is it worth $300? I mean, it doesn't have to be worth $1,000. Why is it worth value? And that will take people on their education into why digital ownership is important. Whereas in the current sense, I might own, I don't know, a legendary sword in Zelda or a legendary player in FIFA, but I can't do anything with it outside of that game ecosystem. But with Web3, I can then sell that, I can then rent it out. There are different ways for me to monetize the value that I've added into an ecosystem, which currently doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think it's the dream of any gamer to really own his assets, and that if he does get banned, he can bring his items to another game. Going back to what you mentioned in terms of needing true digital ownership of our assets, you actually wrote recently on Twitter, imagine Shane Official as a DAO, rewarding the fashion artists for using their designs and paying a fair wage to their factory workers. So Obviously, lots to unpack here, but I wanted your thoughts on how this could happen. Because obviously, when it comes to DAOs, proposals, building a community, we are still at an experimental stage. So, taking this example, how would you build it? Or do you think the tools already exist to build this community, bring the fashion artists, etc.?
So I think the DAO is the end goal. Realistically, the biggest challenge in any DAO is reputation. We've seen within DeFi, token weighted voting makes sense because it's your skin in the game. The more skin in the game, the more say I should have, because fundamentally the purpose of a DAO within DeFi is to make more money. But then DAOs within different contexts, it's not necessarily the case. And if I own, and it's even within DeFi, if it's based on token weighted voting, me having the most amount of tokens doesn't mean I'm the best informed to make decisions. And the reason I mention that is we have to start, in my opinion, with a level of centralization and decentralize over time as we build reputation within an ecosystem. So that's one thing that's important, is in most instances, while we haven't seen a lot of DAOs be successful, is they try to start off too decentralized without a reputation score. The other side of it is DAOs give us organizational structure in an autonomous way, which is super important because we can self-organize to a certain degree, but we also don't have a lot of the tooling necessary. I mean, if you look at where a lot of these communities are hosted, they're hosted on Discord. Discord from a UI UX perspective isn't the friendliest. And the other side, if you're a gamer, excellent. If you're not, I get anxiety whenever my Discord loads up, whenever I'm restarting my machine because of the amount of notification and groups I'm in. Even in a bear market, where can you join this Discord and you might be able to get a whitelist to this mint. It's just like, I'm good, thank you very much. But I've now got 500 invites that has made me switch off towards Discord. So I think the tech is also improving. Crypto is very fast paced and the tech doesn't keep up with our imagination. So part of it as well is the tech isn't there yet. We're getting closer every day. It's not that yet education isn't there, or education is there, but it's sporadic. You asked me earlier on what my take on tokenomics is. There'll be people listening to what I said and they'll think, I completely agree. And there'll be people listening thinking, I completely disagree. It's just about supply. It's just about distribution. It's just about how many tokens. It's about the allocations to each of the different categories. And that's it. It's got nothing else apart from that. So we don't have a unified foundation to build from, even based on buzzwords we use.
So is there an infrastructure in place to build this reputation score? Obviously, there's a lot of players, leading players, Disco, Gitcoin, that are really studying this reputation aspect. Do you think we have the correct formula, or we're still at an experimental stage? Because obviously, when we discuss reputation, to add to this point, do you see reputation, is it for artists, for creators, for developers, for retail? How, first of all, do you define this reputation? And what would be the correct way that you see to kind of build this reputation system?
Fundamentally, it depends on the platform itself. And within that, you have a DAO, but within a DAO, we have sub-DAOs. And it's how or what actions do we want people to be taking part or voting on? And then how do we build reputation? So if it's, if it's within a fashion DAO, that your reputation will be on how many of the pieces you've created have then been used in a fashion walk or have then been minted into NFTs. And there's a community around those. That might be a metric for reputation. If it's in an investing DAO, it could then be on the state of investments at month 3, month 6, year 1, year 2, year 3, and it builds up from there. But there isn't a blueprint that's a capture all. It's more the case of let's look at the beginning, what we need, and decentralize over time. So we still have to start off, in my opinion, with a level of centralization, which might be the key players and team members within a project, and then begin to decentralize over time. I mean, one of the most successful DAOs that's operational and still fully operational is ApeCoin DAO, for example. But ApeCoin DAO had, when it launched, it had a council. I mean, it still has a council, but it had a pre-elected council for 6 months. That was extended for another 3 months, and then they had a vote. And I think most of the council members retained their seats, and there were additional council members that were voted on. So it's that level of centralization, and you decentralize over time, why people build reputation.
And going back to the topic kind of tokenomics, but also reputation, what are your thoughts when it comes to soulbound tokens or badges in general within, first of all, a community like a DAO? do you think that reputation down the line should be tied to a badge that cannot be given to someone else? Or do you see it as more the badge is there just to allow people to vote? How do you view this emerging kind of technology?
It's a spectrum. I think everything we've discussed is a spectrum, and within a spectrum, there's a payoff space. So it depends how far down the spectrum or where on the spectrum you want to be, and what's the pros and cons of that. So I think soulbound tokens definitely have a part to play. As a space, we haven't fully defined what a soulbound token is. Is it an NFT that you cannot trade? Is it a wallet? Can I then have other NFTs bound to a specific NFT, and that makes them soulbound to that NFT? I think there's a number of different standards as of now. So it's an experimental stage. I think the social layer is super important. And badges play a big part into that, because again, how do you define reputation? Well, it's very difficult to define reputation, especially when no one has any to begin with. So at least having badges for different things you've completed or taken part in begin to give us a picture of what that looks like. And over time, as the technology improves, as the interoperability improves, it becomes easier to define what reputation exactly is, and also what the functionalities of the DAO and who gets what say. So it's not based on token weighted, but it's based on the different subject domains that you've shown understanding on. And the more understanding you have, the higher voting power you have.
I actually wanted to have your point of view. First of all, do you think that play to earn as a model is viable, sustainable over time? What we saw with Axie, it was an incredible experience, still ongoing, but we also saw what could happen. So what are your overall thoughts when it comes to play to earn, potential new models when it comes to gaming, and also just, I guess, the general debate when it comes to deflationary versus inflationary tokenomics that nobody seems to have really figured out completely?
Yeah, so a quick word on Axie. Axie broke through so many ceilings that it gave us a new business model that didn't exist prior to that. And with that, we saw the pros and cons. In hindsight, it's very easy to point at something and say, well, it didn't work because of X, Y, and Z. But no one could have predicted the success of Axie. And we wouldn't be here today with all of these different to earn or and earn models if it wasn't for that success. I think it's a lot of it depends on network effects. It depends on number of users coming in. It also depends on where the revenue is coming from. And when I say revenue, we need an income to then be able to pay out the players. And if that's relying on new players coming in, that's only sustainable for a period of time. And we say Ponzi-nomics or a pyramid scheme. A lot of tokenomics have been built in a way that's designed on new users coming in, which is why they failed, but which is why they were a success to begin with. But they didn't pivot away from that model to a more sustainable model. One of I normally don't like to talk about projects internally, so this is not a shill, but it's more so an educational use case. One of our game studios, Vika, they create mobile games. So this is casual and hyper casual mobile games based on different IPs like Deal or No Deal, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, so on and so forth. And what they did as a proof of concept was they generate their main source of revenue is via advertising. So they show ads in game. And what they did as a POC, proof of concept, was they would share some of the ad revenue with users, and then the users would be able to get the payout in Bitcoin. And what they saw was a 20% conversion from Web2 players to Web3 players. So that was the proof of concept. And that makes it actually sustainable because you're not generating this money from new players coming in. You have ad revenue coming in and you're sharing part of that ad revenue. So that makes it a very sustainable model as long as there are advertisers willing to spend money to advertise, as opposed to, let's say, Steppen, for example, and a lot of other, and this is no negativity towards Steppen, but to a lot of move to earn, sleep to earn. In general, we don't do these things to earn. If I want to get healthy, I don't do it to earn. I do it because I want to get healthy, because I want to get fit. It's only the top few percentile of each of these different verticals where your esports, if it's gaming, or that your sports professionals, be it footballers or boxers or Olympians, they're the ones who move to earn in that instance.
Yeah, and I think one important component also in everything that you mentioned is the entertainment value. I think it was Elon Musk in the past who said, sometimes the best outcome or the most logical outcome is the entertainment proposal. And when it comes to move to earn, sleep to earn, play to earn, obviously maybe the product is not there, but the concept is probably entertaining for most people, which is why it succeeded. At least that could be argued.
It can. I think a big part of it is the rewards as well. And the biggest issue for a lot of projects is the amount of rewards they pay out in a short space of time. And those rewards are not sustainable. So you see a massive surge in people wanting to use a game, or if it's a DeFi protocol. And as soon as the rewards stop or they're nowhere near as high, you just see an instant drop off in daily active users or daily wallets connected or whichever KPI or metric you want to use alongside that. So sustainability is important. But then the other side of it is, would Stepan, in this example, have reached the heights it reached if it wasn't for the FOMO, if it wasn't for the way they structured the activation codes for you to be able to refer someone to come in, if it wasn't for the crazy rewards they were paying out, and the early NFT investors or people who brought the shoes because they genuinely believed in the product. There's no issue with rewarding early contributors. The issue is over rewarding early contributors. It's great short term because you get that hype, but medium to long term, it really has a negative impact on the ecosystem.
Yeah, those are very good points. As we approach the end of this episode, I wanted to know what are your guilty pleasures when it comes to kind of Web3 in general? When you're not the head of tokenomics, it could be anything, from gaming, NFTs, DeFi, or even outside. Like, what do you enjoy doing? How do you kind of reset your mental when it comes to all these topics?
It's difficult because this isn't, I mean, yes, it's a job, but it's more a passion project. So crypto is a passion project. So it's not like I'm wearing my head of tokenomics hat now, and then when I'm just leisurely reading or scrolling through crypto or reading some research from like the block or something like this, that it's not, it's as much, it's, I guess, consuming information because I want to consume. But then outside of crypto, I try to play football as much as I can. So this is this is soccer for those people in America, but like actual football. To switch off, I've got two young boys as well, so spending time with the missus and the kids is a nice way to switch off and just trying to find the balance, which is probably one of the hardest industries to be able to find a healthy work-life balance, because it's not really work, it's more life. So it's a bit like, well, how do I have a life balance? I don't know if I've answered your question. I'll probably set you off with
That's
more
good.
questions.
Any final thoughts before we end the episode? Either a project that inspired you recently, an article, a shout out to anybody in particular?
I'm with a lot of bias in what I'm about to say, but a big shout out to Yatsu and Robbie Young. Yatsu, the chairman, Robbie, the CEO of Animoca Brands. They carry the torch so well for what we believe in, which is the open metaverse, which is blue ocean over red ocean, which is we're all in this together and we have to build together. We have to help one another. So there are a lot of new people coming into the space who have a Web2 mindset. And what I mean by that is that it's just a competitive mindset of we need to do it before someone else does.
You mentioned that last topic.
Yep.
I want to really briefly touch upon.
Okay, let's do it.
Obviously, it's the mission of Animoca, which is the open metaverse, and nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the coming years. But if you had to give a timeline, when you look at artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, when you look at the last bull run and the metaverse in general, how do you see it being shaped when it comes to having an open metaverse in 2025 and 2030? If you had to give, like, obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but a general prediction in terms of where we are at in a couple of years and in the next decade.
So I think interoperability is very important, because the open metaverse essentially means I can be who I am in one ecosystem and still be that representation in another ecosystem. So being able to take my assets or my NFTs or my avatars across different metaverses, so to speak. So I believe interoperability is very important. We're still, in my opinion, a fair bit away from that, but we're starting to see the technology reach a point where we can have levels of interoperability, if it's via wrapping tokens or if it's via, you've got like layer 0 or Dfinity, where we're able to integrate different chains within that chain and run transactions across that. We're still experimenting with different aspects, but fundamentally it's interoperability and people understanding that, and there needs to be equitable. So it's not necessarily giving everyone the same thing, but giving people what they need to be able to continue adding value. And that's fundamental to us building this open metaverse, where competition is healthy, but competition is not the be all and end all from that aspect. And I do see the next bull run not being kicked off by a specific genre, but more so by a number of people adopting blockchain technology without realizing they've adopted blockchain technology. And then we hit an inflection point where, wait, I'm using all of these dApps or all of these platforms, and the backend is blockchain. And I have all of these NFTs, but they're not called NFTs anymore because there's so many different types of NFTs that we're using different terms that people can understand. And for me, that will be a hell of a lot closer to mainstream adoption than where we are today.
Oh, great. I guess it's time to wrap up on really this. Obviously, if you have a final thought, go for it.
Watch out for NewCoin. I know what's being built by the team is amazing. A lot of work's been put into this over the last couple of years from what I've seen and what I know. And I'm quite bullish to see what comes next.
Thank you so much for
a nice little shout out for you guys. But it's fair. It's fair.
Well, thank you very much for these kind words, Mohamed, and obviously for joining us today. Links for Mohamed and also Animoca will be in the description. As for us, if you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms. So Twitter is NEWFORUM_NCO. Any likes, shares, or subscribes are very appreciated, and have a great day. And thank you once again, Mohamed.
Thank you, everyone.